The Pythagorean Theorem. We've all heard those words before, and today is the day we are going to learn the basics of it. So the Pythagorean Theorem has to do with a right triangle, and a right triangle is a triangle that has one right angle. And we label our vertices or our angles with A, B, and C, those letters. Now, the letter C is always the right angle, right? And the other two angles are A and B. Now we have to get into a good habit. When we label the vertices or the angles of our triangles, we always use capital letters. Now we also label the sides, and the sides are also labeled A, B, and C, but they are lowercase. That is why it's really, really important to know the difference between the two. And we always put the corresponding letter across the triangle from its angle or its vertices. Okay, so here's capital letter A. Across the triangle is going to be lowercase a. Here is B. We're going to go right across, and it is going to be a lowercase or uppercase b, lowercase b. Across from angle C, across from the right angle, is lowercase c. It's kind of hard to tell the difference right there. This particular length is called hypotenuse, okay? So that has a special name, hypotenuse. Letter C across from the right angle is always called the hypotenuse. The other two are called legs. Okay, so A and B are called legs, C is called the hypotenuse. So the theorem states in any right triangle, the sum of the squares of the lengths of the two legs is equal to the square of the hypotenuse. So we have a formula. I'm sure you have heard it before or seen it, maybe even worked with it. And that is A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So once again, the sum of the squares of the lengths of the legs of a right triangle is equal to the square of the length of the hypotenuse. So let's use that. Let's look at this right triangle. Right? We have one of our legs is 9, one is 12, and we're trying to find C. C is our hypotenuse. How do we know that? Well, of course, it's labeled as C. But we also know that because across from the right angle is always our hypotenuse. So we could say that this is angle C, and we can put the A and the B. So this we know is lowercase b, and this we know is lowercase a. So we can say A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Now we are going to start putting in the values in this algebraic equation. So A we have as 12, so 12 squared plus B squared, and B is 9. And we don't know C, that is what we are trying to find. So we have 12 squared plus 9 squared equals C squared. Now we're going to just start doing the math. 12 squared is 144, 9 squared is 81, and we keep this as C squared. Now we can add these two, and here we get 225 equals C squared. Now where do we go from here? What we can do, we learned this a few lessons ago, is we can take the square root of these values. So we can take the square root of both sides. We can do the same thing to these equations as long as we do the same thing to both sides. So we can take the square root of both sides. Now let's look at the right side first, the square root of C squared. Now a square root means what am I going to take to multiply by itself to get what's underneath here. So in other words, what times what equals C squared? Well, that is the letter C, because we know C times C equals C squared. Therefore, the square root of c squared is just c. Now we're going to take the square root of 225, and that is 15. Now, we just want to focus on the principal root, the positive root, because we're talking about a distance, and a distance in a triangle can only be positive. So what we have found now is c equals 15. Our hypotenuse has a length of 15. Let's do one more example. In this triangle, we're trying to find A. We are trying to find one of the legs. How do we know this? Well, it's labeled as A, but sometimes we're not given the letters. But we know that right across from the right angle is our hypotenuse, and that is always labeled C. So we are going to start with our Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. We know that the hypotenuse is right here. So we are going to plug 17 in for C. We are trying to find A, so A stays where it is, A squared. And then the letter or the number 15 is being replaced with B. So we have 15 squared. Okay, now we can start doing our math. A squared is the same. 15 squared is 225. 17 squared is 289. Now we're going to try to get our variable by itself. So we have to remove this 225. Since this is adding, we are going to subtract 225 from both sides. This disappears, so we're left with a squared equals 64. So now we're left with a squared with our variable on one side. We can take the square root of both sides. Square root of a squared is just a. Square root of 64 is 8. So our missing length of our leg is 8. And that is the basics of the Pythagorean theorem.